The advertisement in the Guthrie Gazette read simply, "Housekeeper needed immediately. Room, board, fair wages. Must cook, clean, manage household. Apply Samuel Randall Ranch, 5 miles north." Olivia Norton held the crumpled newspaper in trembling hands, her reticule containing exactly $3.17, which was all that remained of her life savings after burying her father 2 weeks prior in this God-forsaken Oklahoma Territory town in April of 1893. She stood outside the newspaper office on Oklahoma Avenue, the spring wind whipping her worn black mourning dress around her ankles, and made a decision that felt simultaneously desperate and inevitable. At 23 years old, she had no family, no prospects, and a landlady who had made it abundantly clear that Friday was the last day Olivia could occupy the rented room without payment. The housekeeper position was not what she needed, but it would buy her time to figure out what came next. What she truly needed was a husband, someone to provide security and a place in this harsh world. But respectable marriage proposals did not materialize for penniless orphans with no connections. The walk to the Randall Ranch took nearly 2 hours in the afternoon heat. Olivia's practical boots, already worn thin, raised small clouds of red dust with each step. The Oklahoma landscape stretched endlessly around her, rolling grasslands dotted with blackjack oak and the occasional homestead. She passed a freight wagon heading into town, the driver tipping his hat politely, and tried not to think about how exposed she felt on this open road, how vulnerable. The ranch appeared gradually, materializing from the prairie like something inevitable. A 2-story wooden house painted white, though the paint was peeling in places, sat surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could hear the sound of hammering coming from somewhere beyond the main house. Olivia smoothed her dress, tucked a strand of dark hair back into her simple bun, and approached the front porch with as much confidence as she could manufacture. Before she could knock, the door opened to reveal a man who looked simultaneously exhausted and irritated. He was tall, probably 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His blue work shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing strong forearms, and his expression suggested he had been interrupted from something important. "Can I help you?" His voice was rough, impatient. "I am here about the housekeeper position," Olivia said, lifting her chin. "The advertisement in the Gazette." Samuel Randall looked her up and down with an assessing gaze that was more practical than personal, evaluating her like he might evaluate livestock. "You have experience." "I managed my father's household for 7 years. I can cook, clean, sew, preserve food, manage accounts, and handle any domestic responsibility required." The words came out more forcefully than she intended, pride stiffening her spine despite her circumstances. "Your father's household." He repeated the phrase slowly. "Where is your father now?" "He passed 2 weeks ago. Pneumonia." Olivia kept her voice steady, refusing to show weakness before this stranger. Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a brief softening that disappeared almost immediately. He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in. I will show you what needs doing, and you can tell me if you are still interested." The interior of the house told a story of neglect and masculine incompetence. Dishes were piled in the kitchen basin. Dust covered every surface. Laundry was heaped in corners, and the general disorder suggested that no woman had tended this space in quite some time. Samuel walked through the rooms without apparent embarrassment, gesturing at the chaos. "My wife died 14 months ago. Fever. I have been managing alone since then, but the ranch demands too much time. I need someone who can handle the house, the cooking, all of it, so I can focus on the cattle and the land. I have 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse and take meals here. Breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Room is upstairs, second door on the left. Wages are $10 a month plus room and board. $10 a month. It was not generous, but it was survival. Olivia looked around the devastated kitchen and made rapid calculations. The work would be substantial, but she had done similar labor for years. More importantly, she would have shelter, food, and time to plan her next move. "I accept the position," she said firmly. Samuel nodded once, businesslike. "You can start immediately." "I have work in the south pasture that cannot wait. I can start now. I will need to return to town tomorrow to collect my belongings and settle my affairs. Take the wagon in the morning. I will have one of the hands drive you." He was already moving toward the door, clearly eager to return to his interrupted work. "Make whatever you need for supper tonight. Supplies are in the pantry and root cellar." Then he was gone, boots heavy on the porch steps, leaving Olivia alone in the silent, messy house. She stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of masculine helplessness, and felt an unexpected surge of purpose. This was not what she had imagined for her life, but it was something. A place to sleep, food to eat, work to occupy her hands and mind. It would do for now. She removed her bonnet and coat, found an apron hanging on a hook, and began to work. By the time Samuel and his ranch hands came in for supper at 6 o'clock, Olivia had made significant progress. The kitchen was clean, dishes washed and put away, the table scrubbed and set with mismatched plates. She had found potatoes, onions, and salt pork in the pantry, along with flour and other staples, and managed to produce a simple but substantial meal. The men tracked in mud and dust, but stopped abruptly when they saw the transformed space. "Well now," one of them said, a younger man with red hair and freckles. "Looks like civilization has returned." "Mind your boots," Olivia said automatically, the words familiar from years of managing her father's house. "Remove them by the door." The red-haired man grinned and obeyed. The other hand, an older man with a graying beard, followed suit without comment. Samuel said nothing, but his eyes moved around the kitchen with something that might have been approval. They ate in relative silence. The men focused on their food with the single-minded intensity of people who performed hard physical labor. Olivia served them but did not sit, feeling the awkwardness of her position as neither family nor servant, something uncomfortably in between. "It is good," Samuel said finally, his voice gruff. "The food, it is good." "Thank you." Olivia refilled his coffee cup, noting the calluses on his hands, the weariness in his shoulders. Whatever else Samuel Randall might be, he was clearly a man who worked himself to exhaustion. After the men returned to their evening chores, Olivia cleaned the supper dishes and explored her new living quarters. The room upstairs was small but clean, containing a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the front yard. The quilt on the bed was handmade, the pattern intricate, and Olivia wondered if Samuel's dead wife had stitched it. She wondered what the woman had been like, what her life had been like in this house, whether she had been happy. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her, Olivia allowed herself to acknowledge the precariousness of her situation. She was alone in a house with 3 men, dependent on their goodwill and her own usefulness. If Samuel decided to dismiss her, she would have nothing again. She needed to make herself indispensable, at least until she could find a more permanent solution to her circumstances. What she really needed was a husband, but the thought filled her with a complicated mixture of desperation and dread. She had no desire to marry just anyone, to bind herself legally to a stranger who might be cruel or incompetent. But what choice did women have in 1893, especially women without resources? Marriage was survival, plain and simple. She fell asleep making lists in her head of everything that needed to be done to restore the house to proper order. The next morning, Olivia woke before dawn, dressed quickly, and went downstairs to start breakfast. She found Samuel already in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee with the helpless frustration of someone unaccustomed to the task. He looked up when she entered, something like relief crossing his face. "I usually just boil it," he admitted, "but it never tastes right." "Because you boil it," Olivia said, taking over the process. "You steep it." "I will show you, though I suspect you would prefer to simply let me handle it from now on." "That is why I hired you," Samuel said, stepping back. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth, the first she had seen from him. While she prepared breakfast, Samuel sat at the table with account books and papers, working through ranch business with a pencil and fierce concentration. Olivia found herself stealing glances at him, trying to assess the man who was now, essentially, her employer and landlord. He had a strong profile, a stubborn set to his jaw, and the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years of outdoor work. He looked older than his 30 years, worn down by labor and, she suspected, grief. "I will need to go into town today," she reminded him as she set plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. Samuel looked up from his accounts. "Tom can drive you, the red-haired one. He needs to pick up supplies anyway." Tom turned out to be cheerful and talkative, which was both a relief and slightly exhausting after the taciturn Samuel. He drove the wagon into Guthrie with easy competence, chattering about the ranch, the weather, the price of cattle, and anything else that crossed his mind. Olivia learned that Samuel had inherited the ranch from his father 3 years ago, that his wife Elizabeth had died during a fever outbreak that swept through the territory, and that Samuel had barely spoken to anyone beyond absolute necessity for months after her death. "He is a good man," Tom said seriously, glancing at Olivia. "Just sad, real sad, but he is fair, works harder than anyone, and he takes care of his people. You will be treated right here, Miss Norton." Olivia nodded, filing away this information. It was reassuring in a way, though it did not change the fundamental uncertainty of her position. In Guthrie, she settled her account with the landlady, packed her few belongings into a worn carpetbag, and made one final stop at the general store. With some of her precious remaining dollars, she purchased fabric, thread, and a few other necessities. If she was going to live at the ranch, she would need to make herself at least one new dress, as her mourning clothes were falling apart. Tom helped her back into the wagon, handling her carpetbag with exaggerated care, and they returned to the ranch by mid-morning. Olivia spent the rest of the day in a frenzy of cleaning, attacking the accumulated dirt and disorder with systematic determination. By evening, the downstairs was transformed. The floors were swept and mopped, the furniture was dusted and polished, the windows were washed, and curtains that had been dingy with neglect were soaking in a tub, ready to be scrubbed and rehung. Samuel came in for supper and stopped in the doorway, staring around the front room as if he did not recognize his own house. "How did you do all this?" "It is my job," Olivia said simply, though her back ached and her hands were raw from lye soap. He continued to stare, and she saw something complicated move through his expression, grief and memory and something else she could not identify. "It looks like it did before, when Elizabeth was alive." Olivia did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and returned to the kitchen. She heard Samuel follow slowly, his boots heavy on the clean floors. Over the following weeks, a routine established itself. Olivia rose before dawn, prepared breakfast, cleaned, did laundry, tended the kitchen garden she discovered behind the house, prepared the midday dinner, performed more household tasks, made supper, and fell into bed exhausted. The work was endless, but it was also oddly satisfying. The house responded to her efforts, becoming steadily more comfortable and organized. Samuel remained distant but polite, interacting with her only when necessary, treating her with the impersonal courtesy one might show a competent employee. He spent his days working the ranch with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, often returning after dark, eating whatever she had kept warm for him, and disappearing upstairs without conversation. Tom, on the other hand, whose name was Martin, were more sociable. Tom, in particular, seemed determined to befriend her, telling jokes at meals and complimenting her cooking with enthusiastic sincerity. Martin was quieter but kind, thanking her for every meal, every mended shirt, every small domestic service she provided. May arrived with warmer weather and the hard work of spring branding. The ranch became even busier, with Samuel and the hands working from before sunrise until after sunset, pushing themselves to exhaustion. Olivia adjusted the meal schedule, preparing food that could be eaten quickly or kept warm, and tried to make the house a place of rest and comfort for the exhausted men. One evening in mid-May, she was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw Tom helping Samuel off his horse, Samuel's face twisted with pain and his left arm hanging at an awkward angle. Olivia ran outside, her heart suddenly pounding. "What happened?" "Horse spooked, threw him into a fence post," Tom said grimly. "I think his arm might be broken." "Get him inside," Olivia ordered, holding the door open. They maneuvered Samuel into the house and into a chair at the kitchen table. His face was pale beneath the tan, jaw clenched against obvious pain. "I am going to need to examine your arm," Olivia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It needs to be set properly, or it will not heal right." Samuel nodded tightly. She carefully cut away his shirt sleeve, revealing an arm that was already swelling and bruising. She had seen injuries before, had helped her father who had done some amateur doctoring in their community, but her hands still trembled slightly as she gently probed the injury. "It is broken," she confirmed. "I can set it, but it will hurt. Tom, I need you to hold him steady. Martin, bring me those straight pieces of wood from the kindling box and clean strips of cloth." What followed was 10 minutes of carefully controlled agony. Samuel did not cry out, but sweat poured down his face as Olivia set the bone with as much gentleness and firmness as she could manage. She splinted and wrapped the arm, then fashioned a sling from a dish towel. "You need to keep it immobilized for at least 6 weeks, she told him. "No heavy work, no riding if you can avoid it." "I cannot afford 6 weeks, Samuel said through gritted teeth. "There is too much work." "Then the work will have to wait, or you will have a useless arm for the rest of your life," Olivia said sharply. "Do you understand?" Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, surprise at her tone perhaps, or maybe a reluctant respect. "I understand." She gave him laudanum from her father's old medical kit, which she had packed carefully among her belongings, and watched as the medicine slowly eased the tension from his face. Tom and Martin took him upstairs to his room, handling him with rough gentleness. When they came back down, Tom looked at Olivia with open admiration. "That was well done, Miss Norton. Real well done." "I only did what was necessary," Olivia said, but she felt a small glow of satisfaction nonetheless. She had been useful, genuinely useful, in a way that went beyond cooking and cleaning. Over the next few days, Samuel proved to be a terrible patient. He chafed at his restrictions, tried repeatedly to do tasks that required 2 functional arms, and generally made himself and everyone around him miserable with his frustration. Olivia found herself in the unexpected role of nurse and enforcer, following him around the house and stopping him from doing inadvisable things. "You cannot carry water buckets with one arm," she said, physically removing the bucket from his good hand. "I cannot just sit around doing nothing," Samuel snapped back, his frustration evident. "Then sit around doing something that does not require two arms. You have account books, correspondence, other tasks that can be done sitting down." They glared at each other, tension crackling in the space between them. Then, unexpectedly, Samuel laughed, a rusty sound like a door that had not been opened in a long time. "You are stubborn," he said. "So are you," Olivia replied. "But I am right, and you know it." Samuel shook his head, but he returned to the chair and his account books without further argument. Olivia went back to her work, feeling oddly triumphant. Something shifted between them after that exchange. Samuel began to talk to her, small conversations at first, comments about the ranch or questions about the household. She learned that he had been raised on this land, had always loved the work despite its hardships, and that he missed his wife with an ache that had not lessened with time. "She wanted children," he said one evening, speaking to his coffee cup more than to Olivia. "We were trying. And then she got sick, and it was over so fast. 3 days from healthy to dead. I never got to tell her how much I loved her, not properly. I was always too busy with the work, always thinking there would be time later." Olivia felt her throat tighten with sympathy. "I am sorry." "What about you?" Samuel asked, looking up at her with surprising directness. "You said you managed your father's household. What happened to your mother?" "She died when I was 16. Childbed fever after my brother was stillborn. My father never recovered from losing her. He lived for 7 more years, but he was never the same. It was like he was just going through the motions of living, waiting to join her." Olivia surprised herself with the honesty of this admission. She had never spoken so plainly about her father's grief before. "And you took care of him all those years," Samuel said softly. "Someone had to." Olivia stood abruptly, needing to move to do something with her hands. "More coffee." Samuel accepted the deflection, and they did not speak of personal matters again that evening. But something had opened between them, a small door that had not existed before. As May turned into June, Samuel's arm healed slowly but surely. He remained restricted from heavy labor, which meant Tom and Martin were working themselves ragged trying to keep up with the ranch demands. Olivia found herself taking on additional tasks, helping with the vegetable garden, feeding chickens, even assisting with milking the dairy cow. One afternoon, while she was hanging laundry in the yard, a rider approached the house at speed. Olivia shaded her eyes against the sun, watching as the man dismounted and strode toward where Samuel was standing by the corral, his arm still in its sling. She could not hear the conversation, but she saw Samuel's body language shift, tension radiating from him suddenly. When the rider left a few minutes later, Samuel stood staring after him with an expression of deep concern. Olivia approached cautiously. "What is wrong?" "That was Jenkins from the next ranch over. There have been reports of cattle rustlers working the area. He lost 20 head last week." Samuel's jaw was tight with anger and worry. "I cannot afford to lose stock, not this year, but I cannot exactly chase rustlers with one good arm." "What will you do?" "Set watches at night. Warn Tom and Martin. Hope the rustlers move on to easier targets." Samuel turned to look at her, and she saw the frustration in his eyes, the helplessness of a man unable to protect what was his. "We will manage," Olivia said with more confidence than she felt. "The men are capable and your arm is healing well. Another few weeks and you will be back to full strength." Samuel nodded, but the worry did not leave his face. That night, they implemented a watch system, with Tom and Martin taking shifts to patrol the property. Olivia lay awake in her room, listening to the night sounds, wondering what would happen if rustlers did come, if there would be violence, gunfire, danger. The Wild West was not as wild as it had been 20 years ago, but it was still a place where law was uncertain, and men took what they could get away with taking. 3 nights later, she was awakened by shouting and the sound of gunshots. Olivia bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering, and pulled a shawl over her nightgown before running downstairs. Samuel was already at the door, struggling to load a rifle one-handed. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice hard. "Let me help you with that," Olivia said, taking the rifle and loading it with hands that only shook slightly. Her father had taught her to shoot years ago, though she had never aimed at anything more threatening than a coyote after their chickens. More gunshots echoed from the direction of the cattle pens. Samuel swore and headed out the door, Olivia right behind him despite his orders. They reached the corral to find Tom and Martin exchanging shots with 3 riders who were trying to cut cattle from the herd. The rustlers were firing as they rode, their aim wild but dangerous. Samuel raised his rifle, bracing it awkwardly against his body since he could not properly shoulder it, and fired at the riders. Olivia found herself raising the second rifle, the weight familiar in her hands, and fired at the ground near the horses' hooves. The animals shied violently, spoiling their riders' aim and balance. The rustlers, finding more resistance than they had anticipated, turned and fled into the darkness. Tom and Martin fired after them, more to ensure they kept going than with intent to hit. The whole confrontation lasted perhaps 5 minutes, but Olivia's hands were shaking violently by the time it was over. Samuel turned to her, his face a mixture of anger and something else, concern perhaps. "I told you to stay inside, and let you try to shoot one-handed. You could barely brace that rifle." Olivia's voice came out sharper than she intended, fueled by receding fear. "You needed help. You could have been shot. So could you. So could Tom and Martin. But we all did what was necessary." She met his eyes steadily, refusing to back down. For a long moment, Samuel stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out with his good hand and touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of thanks or acknowledgement. "Come on, let us go back inside." "Tom, Martin, good work. Stay alert the rest of the night." Back in the house, Samuel sank into a chair at the kitchen table, suddenly looking exhausted. Olivia put coffee on to heat, her hands finally steadying as she focused on the familiar task. "You are full of surprises," Samuel said quietly. "I suppose I could say the same about you." Olivia poured coffee for both of them, sitting down across from him at the table. The intimacy of the moment struck her suddenly. The 2 of them alone in the quiet kitchen in the hours before dawn, both in nightclothes, both still shaking slightly from the confrontation with the rustlers. "Thank you," Samuel said, "for helping, for being brave." "I did not feel brave. I felt terrified." The admission came out before she could stop it. That is what brave is, doing what needs to be done even when you are terrified. Samuel wrapped his good hand around his coffee cup, and Olivia noticed how strong his hand was, scarred and calloused from years of work. Elizabeth would never come outside when there was trouble. She would stay in the house like I told her to, scared and waiting. I always thought that was the right thing, the safe thing. But tonight I needed help, and you gave it without hesitation. That means something. Olivia felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she could not quite name. "I spent 7 years caring for my father alone. I learned to do what needed to be done, whether it was proper for a woman or not." "Proper seems less important out here than back east," Samuel observed. "Out here, everyone does what is necessary to survive." They talked until the sky began to lighten, discussing the ranch, the dangers of the territory, their past lives, and their present circumstances. Olivia found herself relaxing into the conversation, enjoying the rare pleasure of being truly listened to. Samuel was intelligent and thoughtful when he chose to talk, and his dry humor surprised her repeatedly, making her laugh in the quiet kitchen. When Tom and Martin came in for breakfast, they found Olivia cooking and Samuel still at the table, both of them tired but oddly content. Tom raised his eyebrows at the domestic scene but had the wisdom to say nothing. Over the following weeks, as June progressed and the Oklahoma heat intensified, Olivia became aware of a subtle shift in the household dynamic. Samuel sought her out more often, asking her opinion on ranch matters, discussing decisions about stock and crops. He began taking his evening coffee on the porch, and she found herself joining him there, sitting in the second rocking chair, talking or sometimes just sharing companionable silence. She noticed things about him she had not registered before. The way he was patient with animals, gentle despite his size and strength. The way he treated Tom and Martin with respect, never pulling rank unnecessarily. The way he smiled when he thought no one was looking, watching the sunset over his land with obvious love for this place. She also became aware that she was thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he would think of a particular meal she was preparing, noticing when he came in for supper with his hair freshly washed, feeling a small thrill when his hand brushed hers accidentally as she poured his coffee. This was dangerous territory. Samuel Randall was her employer, nothing more. He was still grieving his dead wife. Olivia was in no position to develop romantic feelings for anyone, least of all the man who held her security in his hands. But hearts, she was learning, did not follow logic or propriety. One evening in late June, Samuel's arm finally healed enough to remove the splint. Olivia unwrapped the bandages carefully, examining the arm with a critical eye. It had healed straight and clean, a testament to proper setting and Samuel's grudging compliance with her orders to rest it. "Try moving it slowly," she instructed. Samuel flexed his arm, rotated his wrist, made a fist and released it. A broad smile spread across his face, the most genuine expression of happiness she had seen from him. "It is good. It is completely good. You did well, Olivia." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice made her breath catch. "I am glad." Samuel stood, testing the arm with various movements, clearly delighted to have full function restored. Then, impulsively, he reached out and pulled Olivia into a one-armed hug, a gesture of pure gratitude and joy. The embrace lasted only a moment, but it was long enough for Olivia to register the warmth of his body, the solid strength of him, the smell of soap and sun, and something indefinably masculine. When he released her, stepping back quickly as if suddenly aware of the impropriety, her face was burning. "Sorry," Samuel said, looking embarrassed. "I did not mean to be forward, I was just happy." "It is all right," Olivia managed, though her heart was pounding. "I understand." An awkward silence fell between them. Samuel cleared his throat, rubbing his newly freed arm. "I should get back to work. There is a lot to catch up on." He left the house quickly, and Olivia stood alone in the kitchen, pressing her hand to her chest where her heart was still racing. She was in trouble, she realized. Deep trouble. Because she was falling in love with Samuel Randall, and that was a complication she could not afford. The next few days were awkward, both of them overly polite, carefully maintaining distance. But the strain could not last. The house was too small, their lives too intertwined, and the pull between them too strong. It was Olivia who finally broke the stalemate, finding Samuel in the barn one evening after supper, checking on a mare that was close to foaling. Are you avoiding me?" She asked directly, standing in the barn doorway with her arms crossed. Samuel looked up from the horse, surprise crossing his face. "No, I just have been busy." "You have been busy for the 3 months I have been here. But the last few days, you have been busy in a way that ensures we are never alone together." Olivia stepped into the barn, closing the distance between them. "If I offended you somehow, or if you regret hugging me, you should just say so." "I do not regret it," Samuel said quietly. "That is the problem." "Why is it a problem?" Samuel set down the curry brush he had been holding and turned to face her fully. In the dim light of the barn, his face was half in shadow, but she could see the conflict in his expression. "Because you work for me. Because you depend on me for your livelihood and your home. Because I am still in love with my dead wife, or I should be, or I do not know what I am supposed to feel anymore." Olivia absorbed this, considering her words carefully. "I work for you, yes, but I am not helpless or coerced. If I speak to you, if I spend time with you, it is because I choose to. As for your wife, Samuel, she has been dead for more than a year. Love does not vanish instantly, but neither does it mean you must be alone forever." "What are you saying?" Samuel's voice was rough, his eyes searching her face. "I am saying that I care about you. I admire you. I enjoy your company. I am saying that if you feel the same way, you should not avoid me out of some misplaced sense of propriety or guilt." Olivia's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "And if you do not feel the same way, then tell me plainly, and we can return to a simple employer and employee relationship. But this awkward silence is unbearable." Samuel stared at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the space between them in 2 strides and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss, not tentative or questioning. It was fierce and hungry and desperate, a man who had been denying himself something finally giving in to need. Olivia responded instinctively, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, her body pressing against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I care about you too. More than I should, more than I expected to. You confuse me, Olivia. You have been here such a short time, but I cannot imagine the house without you anymore. I cannot imagine my life without you." "Then do not imagine it," Olivia whispered. "I am here. I am not going anywhere." They kissed again, slower this time, exploring, learning each other. When they finally returned to the house, walking close together in the gathering darkness, everything felt different. The world had shifted on its axis, and there was no going back to what had been before. Over the following weeks, as summer deepened over Oklahoma, their relationship grew and changed. Samuel courted her properly, to the extent that was possible given they lived in the same house. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, spent his evenings talking with her on the porch, told her about his dreams for the ranch, and listened intently to her thoughts and opinions. Tom and Martin noticed the change, of course. Tom teased Samuel mercilessly, clearly delighted by this development. Martin simply nodded his approval and continued eating his meals with appreciation. But there was still the question of Olivia's status, the fundamental inequality of their positions. She was his employee, living in his house, dependent on his goodwill. The territory was full of stories of women who had been used and discarded by men in positions of power over them. Olivia trusted Samuel, but she also understood that trust was not the same as security. One evening in late July, as they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge, Samuel broached the subject that had been hanging between them. "I want to marry you," he said without preamble. "Not because I need a housekeeper, though I do, and not because it is the proper thing to do, though it probably is, but because I love you, Olivia. I love your strength and your intelligence and your kindness. I love the way you make this house a home. I love the way you challenge me and support me in equal measure. I want you to be my wife if you will have me." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. "I love you too. But Samuel, you need to be sure. You need to be certain this is not just loneliness or grief or convenience. I will not be a replacement for Elizabeth. I will not be second best." "You are not a replacement," Samuel said firmly, taking her hand. "Elizabeth was my first love, and I will always cherish what we had. But that chapter of my life is closed. You are not second best, Olivia. You are different. What I feel for you is different. It is new, and it is real, and it is yours alone." "Then yes," Olivia said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Olivia felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness and belonging that she had not felt since before her mother died. She had needed a husband, it was true, but she had found so much more. She had found home. They were married in early August in a simple ceremony at the Guthrie Church, with Tom and Martin standing as witnesses. Olivia wore a new dress she had sewn herself from cream-colored fabric, and Samuel wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut and his face shaved smooth. The circuit preacher who served the area performed the ceremony, his voice carrying through the small wooden church. When Samuel placed the simple gold band on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Olivia felt a sense of peace and happiness that she had thought she might never experience. She was Olivia Randall now, legally bound to this man she had come to love, secured in a way that went beyond employment or charity. The ranch was hers now too, a home she could claim, a place she belonged. Not as a servant or a dependent, but as a partner and a wife. They held a small celebration at the ranch that evening, with Tom and Martin and a few neighboring ranchers invited to share a meal. Olivia had cooked for days, preparing the best food she could manage, and the house was full of laughter and well wishes. It was not a grand society wedding, but it was real and warm and full of genuine happiness. That night, alone together for the first time as husband and wife, Samuel carried her over the threshold of his bedroom, which was now their bedroom. He set her down gently, his hands trembling slightly. "I am nervous," he admitted. "It has been a long time, and I want this to be good for you." Olivia cupped his face in her hands, touched by his vulnerability. "We have time to learn each other. We have the rest of our lives." They came together slowly, carefully, learning the geography of each other's bodies, the sounds and touches that brought pleasure. It was tender and sometimes awkward and utterly lovely, two people joining not just physically, but in every way that mattered. When they finally lay together in the aftermath, tangled in sheets in each other, Olivia felt more complete than she ever had before. "I love you," Samuel whispered against her hair. "I love you too," Olivia replied, and meant it with her whole heart. The months that followed were a period of adjustment and joy. Olivia threw herself into being a ranch wife, which meant not just managing the house, but also helping with the broader work of the ranch. She learned to assist with the vegetable garden that would feed them through winter, to preserve food against the lean months, to help with the endless work of maintaining buildings and equipment. Samuel proved to be a loving and attentive husband. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valued her opinion, and treated her as a true partner. He was also affectionate in ways Olivia had not experienced before, quick to pull her close for a kiss, to take her hand, to tell her he loved her. The physical intimacy between them grew more comfortable and passionate, a source of pleasure and connection. By September, Olivia suspected she might be pregnant. When October came and her suspicions were confirmed, she told Samuel one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Samuel stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of pure joy, picking her up and spinning her around the kitchen. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." He set her down carefully, suddenly concerned. "Should I not have done that? Did I hurt you?" Olivia laughed, giddy with his happiness and her own. "I am pregnant, not made of glass, but you might want to be a bit more careful, yes." Samuel immediately became overly protective, trying to stop her from doing any heavy work, hovering anxiously whenever she climbed stairs or lifted anything heavier than a teacup. Olivia found it both endearing and exasperating, having to constantly reassure him that she was fine, that pregnancy was natural and not an illness. Women have been having babies for all of human history. She told him after he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I promise I will tell you if I need to rest more." "Elizabeth was pregnant once," Samuel said quietly. "For about 3 months. She lost the baby. She was devastated and I did not know how to help her. Then a year later she got sick and died and we never had another chance." "I am terrified of losing you or losing this baby, Olivia. I cannot go through that again." Olivia set down the laundry basket and went to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "You are not going to lose me. I am strong and healthy, but I need you to trust that I know my own limits all right. I need to be able to move and work and live normally, or I will go mad." Samuel nodded against her shoulder, holding her close. "All right, I will try. But you have to promise to tell me if you need anything, if you feel unwell, anything at all. I promise." As fall turned to winter, Olivia's body changed, her waist thickening and then disappearing entirely as the baby grew. Samuel watched her with a mixture of awe and anxiety, his hand often drifting to rest on her belly, feeling the baby kick and move. Tom and Martin were delighted by the news, already making plans to build cradle and baby furniture. Christmas came, and Olivia decorated the house with evergreen branches and made special meals, creating traditions for their growing family. Samuel gave her a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, soft wool in a deep green that brought out her eyes. She gave him a new hat she had made, carefully shaped and blocked, and a shirt she had sewn with tiny, perfect stitches. They spent Christmas evening by the fire, Olivia's head resting on Samuel's shoulder, his hand on her rounded belly, both of them feeling the baby move between them. It was peaceful and perfect, a moment of pure contentment. Winter in Oklahoma could be harsh, and January of 1894 brought bitter cold and occasional snow. Olivia found herself tiring more easily, her body heavy with the pregnancy. She was due in late March or early April, according to her best calculations, and she felt both eager and anxious for the baby to arrive. Samuel had sent word to Guthrie for the doctor to be prepared to come when Olivia went into labor, though the doctor had warned that if weather was bad, he might not be able to reach them. Olivia tried not to think about that possibility, about having to deliver her baby with only Samuel and the ranch hands to help. February arrived with a false promise of spring, warm days that melted the snow and made everyone believe the worst of winter was behind them. Then, on the night of February 15th, a storm rolled in with terrifying speed. Olivia woke to the sound of wind howling around the house and sleet hammering against the windows. She sat up carefully, her belly making quick movements difficult, and saw that Samuel was already awake, standing at the window and watching the storm with a concerned expression. "It is bad," he said without turning. "The animals will need attention. I have to go check on them." "Be careful," Olivia said, though she knew the warning was pointless. A rancher could not simply ignore his livestock in a storm, no matter how dangerous it might be. Samuel dressed in layers, kissed her firmly, and headed out into the howling night. Olivia got up more slowly, dressed, and went downstairs to make coffee and prepare breakfast for when the men came back in. An hour passed, then two. The storm showed no signs of abating, the wind and sleet relentless. Olivia paced the kitchen, worry gnawing at her stomach. Finally, she heard the door open, and Samuel, Tom, and Martin staggered inside, covered in ice, shaking with cold. "The cattle are as secured as we can manage," Samuel said through chattering teeth. "Several of the calves were in trouble, but we got them into the barn. Lost one of the older cows, I think, but we could not find her in this weather." Olivia helped them out of their frozen coats, got them warm coffee, and bustled around making sure they were all right. It was only after she had gotten them situated that she felt the first twinge in her lower back, a pulling sensation that made her pause. No, it was too early. The baby was not due for 6 more weeks. This could not be labor. But over the next hour, the twinges became cramps, and the cramps became unmistakable contractions. Olivia tried to hide her distress, not wanting to alarm Samuel while the storm still raged, but he knew her too well. "What is wrong?" he asked, crossing to her in 2 strides. "Olivia, you are in pain." "I think the baby is coming," she admitted, her voice tight. "But it is too early, Samuel. It is not supposed to be for 6 more weeks." Samuel's face went white. "Tom, saddle a horse. I am riding to Guthrie for the doctor." "You cannot ride in this storm," Martin said grimly. "You will not make it a mile before you freeze to death or get lost. And even if you reach town, the doctor could not get back here in this weather." "Then what do we do?" Samuel's voice was rising with panic. "We manage," Olivia said, forcing calm into her voice despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Women have been having babies without doctors for thousands of years. We will manage." But she was terrified. She had seen what could go wrong with childbirth. Her own mother had died from it. And the baby was coming early, which could mean something was wrong, could mean the baby would not survive, could mean she would not survive. Samuel helped her upstairs to their bedroom, and for the next several hours, Olivia labored while the storm raged outside. The contractions were intense and increasingly frequent, pain like nothing she had ever experienced. Samuel stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. Tom had the sense to boil water and tear cloth into strips, preparing for the practical necessities of birth. Martin stayed downstairs, keeping the fire going and looking generally terrified. As night turned to early morning, Olivia's labor intensified. She was exhausted, pain-racked, and beginning to panic that something was going wrong. The baby should have come by now, should have been born hours ago, but still the labor continued without resolution. "Something is wrong," she gasped during a brief respite between contractions. "The baby should be here by now." Samuel's face was drawn with fear and exhaustion. "What can I do? Tell me what to do." "I do not know," Olivia admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I do not know." Tom appeared in the doorway, his face serious. "Miss Olivia, my mother was a midwife back in Missouri. She taught me some things before I left home. May I examine you, see if I can tell what is happening?" Olivia was beyond modesty at this point. "Please." Tom examined her quickly, his face intent, and then nodded. "The baby is positioned wrong. Not breech exactly, but not quite right. I think I can turn it, but it will hurt." "Do it," Olivia said immediately. "Whatever it takes." What followed was agony beyond anything she had experienced so far. Tom worked carefully but firmly, manipulating the baby from outside her belly, trying to shift it into a better position. Olivia screamed, unable to hold back, and Samuel held her hand so tightly she thought her bones might break. Finally, Tom stepped back, sweating. "That is the best I can do. Try pushing with the next contraction." Olivia bore down with everything she had, and this time she felt the baby move, felt progress. Samuel was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he encouraged her, and Tom coached her through the pushing with the calm authority of someone who had assisted with this process before. And then, as dawn broke and the storm finally began to ease, the baby emerged into Tom's waiting hands with a thin, angry cry. "It is a boy," Tom said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You have a son." Samuel let out a sob of relief, and Olivia felt tears pouring down her face as Tom cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket before placing him in her arms. He was tiny, early as he was, with a wrinkled face and a surprisingly loud voice for such a small creature. But he was alive, breathing, crying, and perfect. "He is beautiful," Samuel whispered, staring at his son with wonder. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Olivia, you are the strongest, bravest person I have ever known." Tom slipped out quietly, giving them privacy, and Olivia and Samuel sat together in the early morning light, their son between them, marveling at the miracle of his existence. "What should we name him?" Olivia asked, running a gentle finger over the baby's tiny hand. "I have been thinking about that," Samuel said. "If you agree, I would like to name him James. It was my father's name, James Thomas Randall." "James Thomas Randall," Olivia repeated. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the family." The baby was small but healthy, a fighter from the start. Olivia recovered slowly, her body exhausted from the ordeal, but she was alive and her baby was alive, and that was everything. Tom was hailed as a hero, though he insisted he had only done what his mother had taught him. Samuel was so grateful he gave Tom a raise and a bonus. The rest of the winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant baby care. James demanded feeding every few hours, cried lustily when he wanted something, and generally ran his parents ragged. But he was also a source of profound joy, a tiny person they had created together, a symbol of their love and their future. Spring came again, green grass returning to the Oklahoma prairie, wildflowers blooming across the rolling hills. By the time James was 2 months old, he had grown considerably, filling out and becoming a chubby, healthy baby with Samuel's blue eyes, and what looked like it might become Olivia's dark hair. One evening in late April, almost exactly a year after Olivia had first walked up the road to the Randall Ranch, she sat on the porch with Samuel, James sleeping peacefully in a cradle Samuel had built with his own hands. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and everything felt peaceful and right. "Do you remember a year ago when I answered your advertisement for a housekeeper?" Olivia asked, watching the sunset. "I remember thinking you looked half-starved and desperate, and wondering if you would run away after seeing the state of my house," Samuel replied with a smile. "I remember thinking you were the most intimidating man I had ever met, and wondering what I had gotten myself into. And now—" Samuel pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Now I know I got everything I needed, everything I did not even know to hope for. I needed a husband for security, but I got a husband who loves me. I got a home, a family, a life. I needed a housekeeper," Samuel said quietly. "But by spring I needed you. Not as an employee, not as a convenience, but as the center of my world. You are my heart, Olivia. You and James, you are everything." They sat together as the stars emerged, their baby sleeping between them, and Olivia thought about how strange life was, how unpredictable. A year ago, she had been desperate and alone, answering an advertisement out of sheer necessity. Now she had more than she had ever dreamed possible. Love, home, family, security, and a future full of promise. James stirred in his cradle, making small baby noises, and Samuel reached down to pick him up, cradling his son with the careful tenderness that always made Olivia's heart swell. She watched her husband holding their baby, both of them silhouetted against the darkening sky, and felt overwhelmingly grateful. The following months brought the routines of family life on an Oklahoma ranch. James grew rapidly, becoming a fat, happy baby who smiled readily and charmed everyone who encountered him. Tom and Martin were completely besotted with the boy, taking turns holding him and making ridiculous faces to elicit his laughter. Summer arrived with scorching heat, and Olivia established a routine of doing heavy work in the early morning and late evening, resting during the worst of the afternoon heat with James. The baby seemed unbothered by the temperature, content to lie on a blanket on the floor, watching the world with serious blue eyes. Samuel continued to work the ranch with Tom and Martin, but he made time for his family in ways Olivia noticed and appreciated. He came in for every meal, spent his evenings with Olivia and James, and took Sundays off except for essential animal care. The ranch was prospering under his management, the herd growing, the land producing well. In August, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a special dinner and an exchange of small gifts. Samuel gave Olivia a cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother, a beautiful piece that she treasured. Olivia gave him a leather journal she had purchased in Guthrie, thinking he might want to record the ranch's progress and his thoughts for the future. "Maybe James will read it someday," she suggested. "Maybe his children. It could be a family record." Samuel looked touched by the idea, immediately beginning to write in the journal that evening, documenting the ranch's history and his hopes for what it would become. As fall arrived and the weather cooled, Olivia began thinking about expanding their family. James was 6 months old now, sleeping through the night, and the terror of his early birth had faded enough that she thought she might be ready to try again. She broached the subject with Samuel one evening after they had put James to bed. "Would you want more children?" she asked carefully. "I know James's birth was difficult, and if you are too worried, I understand." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I would love more children if you want them, but not because I need them or because it is expected. Only if it is something you truly want, Olivia. I will not risk losing you for anything." "I want it," Olivia said firmly. "I want James to have siblings. I want a large, noisy family to fill this house." Samuel smiled against her hair. "Then we will have that. We will fill this house with children and love and noise, and it will be wonderful." By December, Olivia was pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, her body perhaps knowing better what to expect. Samuel was still protective but less panicked, trusting her to know her limits. James was walking by then, toddling around the house with determined concentration, getting into everything and making his parents laugh with his antics. The winter of 1894-1895 was milder than the previous year, and when Olivia went into labor in late April, it was on a beautiful spring day with wildflowers blooming across the prairie. The doctor from Guthrie was able to attend this time, and the birth, while still painful and exhausting, was much easier than James's had been. They had a daughter this time, a tiny girl with dark hair and what looked like it would become Samuel's blue eyes. They named her Rose Elizabeth Randall, honoring Samuel's mother and his first wife, and she was as perfect as her brother. Samuel cried when he held his daughter for the first time, overwhelmed with emotion. "I have everything," he said to Olivia, his voice choked. "A wife I love, a son, a daughter, a good ranch. I have everything I could ever want." Olivia smiled, tired but happy, watching her husband cradle their newborn daughter. "We are blessed." The years that followed were full and rich. Rose grew into a spirited toddler who adored her older brother and kept her parents constantly busy. James became more independent, helping with small chores around the house and following his father around the ranch whenever allowed. In 1897, they had another child, a boy they named Daniel Martin Randall after Olivia's father and their faithful ranch hand Martin. 3 children made the house feel wonderfully chaotic, full of noise and laughter and the constant activity of young life. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel, with Olivia's support and partnership, expanded their holdings, purchasing additional land from a neighbor who was retiring. Tom married a woman from town and moved into a small house Samuel built for them on the ranch property. Martin stayed on, content with his bachelor life and his role as honorary uncle to the Randall children. By 1899, Olivia and Samuel had been married for 5 years, and their life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. James was 6, Rose was 4, and Daniel was 2, each with their own distinct personality and place in the family. The house that had been empty and echoing when Olivia first arrived was now constantly full of children's voices, laughter, and activity. One evening in June, as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep, Samuel took Olivia's hand and looked out over the land he loved. "You remember when you first came here?" he asked. "That day you walked up the road to apply for the housekeeper job, of course. I was terrified and trying to hide it. I thought you were just another desperate woman looking for work, someone who would last a month or 2 before deciding ranch life was too hard." Samuel squeezed her hand. "I never imagined you would become everything to me. My wife, the mother of my children, my partner in every way. I did not know I could love someone as much as I love you." Olivia leaned her head on his shoulder, content. "I came here looking for survival, for a way to keep myself fed and sheltered. I found home instead. I found love. I found everything that matters. We built this together," Samuel said. "This family, this life, it is ours and it is good." "It is more than good," Olivia replied. "It is perfect." They sat together in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night, secure in the life they had built together. The cowboy who had needed a housekeeper had found a wife. The woman who had needed a husband had found love. And by spring, by that first spring they spent together, he had needed her in ways neither of them had anticipated, in ways that had transformed them both. The years continued to unfold in their expected rhythms. James grew tall and strong, already showing signs of his father's build and his mother's quick intelligence. Rose was spirited and fearless, climbing trees and racing her brothers with complete disregard for the limitations society tried to place on girls. Daniel was quieter, thoughtful, with a gentle nature that made him beloved by everyone. In 1901, Olivia gave birth to their 4th and final child, another daughter they named Margaret Ann. By then, the ranch had become one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and Samuel's fair dealing. The Randall family was respected in Guthrie and throughout the territory, which became the state of Oklahoma in 1907. Samuel built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. The house that had been lonely and neglected when Olivia first arrived was now warm and welcoming, a true home filled with love and life. Tom and his wife had 3 children of their own, and the 2 families were close, their children growing up together, running wild across the prairie under the big Oklahoma sky. Martin never married but remained a fixture at the ranch, eventually teaching James everything he knew about horses and cattle. As the children grew older, Olivia and Samuel made sure they understood the value of hard work, education, and treating people with respect, regardless of their station in life. They told their children the story of how they met, of the advertisement for a housekeeper and the desperate woman who answered it, and the love that grew from necessity and proximity into something deep and lasting. James eventually took over management of the ranch, partnering with his father, and then, as Samuel aged, assuming primary responsibility. He married a schoolteacher from Guthrie, a smart woman who reminded Olivia of herself at that age, and they had children who played in the same yard where James had played. Rose became a teacher herself, much to everyone's surprise, taming her wild spirit enough to educate other people's children while maintaining her fundamental independence. She married late, at 28, to a man who appreciated her strength and never tried to diminish it. Daniel found his calling in veterinary medicine, studying at the agricultural college and returning to serve the ranching community that had raised him. He married young and had a brood of children who were as gentle and kind as their father. Margaret, the baby, surprised everyone by developing a talent for music, playing piano with skill that exceeded anything available in their rural community. She eventually moved to Oklahoma City to study seriously, though she returned home often, and her music filled the ranch house whenever she visited. Through all of this, through the passing years and the changing world, Olivia and Samuel remained the center of their family, the foundation upon which everything was built. They grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies showing the effects of years of hard work, but their love remained constant and strong. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1919, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house overflowed with people, 3 generations of Randalls and the extended family they had accumulated over the years. There was music and laughter, enormous quantities of food and speeches that made everyone laugh and cry. Samuel stood up at one point, called for quiet, and raised his glass to Olivia. 25 years ago, I placed an advertisement for a housekeeper. I was lonely and overwhelmed and barely holding my life together. This woman walked up to my door, all pride and desperation, and agreed to work for me for $10 a month. I thought I was hiring help. I had no idea I was meeting the love of my life, the woman who would transform everything, who would give me children and partnership and joy beyond measure. Olivia, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I thank God every day that you answered that advertisement. Olivia stood to embrace him, tears streaming down her face while their family applauded and cheered. She thought about that young woman who had walked up this road so many years ago, scared and alone, and marveled at everything that had grown from that moment of desperation. They continued farming and ranching for several more years, but eventually age and the changing times led them to step back, letting James and his family take over the primary work while they enjoyed a quieter life. They spent their days together, still talking for hours, still enjoying each other's company after more than 3 decades of marriage. Samuel's health began to decline in his early 70s, his heart showing the effects of a lifetime of hard work. Olivia nursed him carefully, managing his medicine, making sure he rested, refusing to let him overdo. The children and grandchildren visited frequently, filling the house with the noise and chaos that Samuel loved. One evening in early spring of 1931, as the Oklahoma prairie bloomed with wildflowers just as it had every spring of their marriage, Samuel and Olivia sat together on the porch in their familiar rocking chairs. He was weaker than he had been, his breathing sometimes labored, but he was content, his hand holding hers as they watched the sunset. "It has been a good life," Samuel said quietly. "The best life. Everything I could have wanted." "It has," Olivia agreed, squeezing his hand gently. "We have been blessed beyond measure." "You made me believe in second chances," Samuel continued. "After Elizabeth died, I thought my life was over, that I would just work until I died and that would be it. Then you came and everything changed. You gave me love again, a family, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me everything, Olivia." "We gave each other everything," Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. "We built this together, Samuel. This life, this family. It is ours and it is beautiful." They sat together as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them for nearly 4 decades of marriage, and Samuel felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever came next, whatever time they had left, it had been worth it. Every moment, every struggle, every joy had been worth it. Samuel lived for several more years, his health fluctuating but his spirit remaining strong. He was surrounded by love always, by children and grandchildren, by the wife who had been his partner and his heart for so long. When he finally passed in the summer of 1934, at the age of 72, it was peacefully in his own bed, with Olivia holding his hand. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. From ranchers and businessmen to the children he and Olivia had helped over the years, families they had supported during hard times, people whose lives they had touched. The church in Guthrie overflowed, and the procession to the cemetery stretched for miles. Olivia stood at his graveside, supported by her children, and said goodbye to the man who had been her everything. She did not regret a single moment of their life together, did not wish for anything to have been different. They had been blessed with love and partnership, and a family that would carry their legacy forward. She lived for another 8 years, remaining on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, the matriarch of a large and loving family. She spent her days gardening, sewing, baking for her grandchildren, and writing in journals about her life, leaving a record for future generations. She wrote about answering an advertisement for a housekeeper position when she was desperate and alone. She wrote about falling in love with a grieving cowboy who needed help managing his household. She wrote about how he needed her by spring, not as an employee but as a partner, as a wife, as the center of his world. She wrote about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch that had started as a place of employment and became her true home. On a spring morning in 1942, Olivia passed away peacefully in her sleep, at the age of 72. She was buried beside Samuel, their graves side by side, overlooking the land they had loved and worked together. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, and James, now an old man himself with grandchildren of his own, stood at his mother's graveside and told the story one more time. The story of how his mother had needed a husband, and his father had needed a housekeeper, and how by spring, by that first spring they spent together, his father had needed her in ways that transformed both their lives. It was a story of love growing from necessity, of 2 lonely people finding each other and building something beautiful together. It was a story of partnership and respect, of working side by side through good times and hard times, of raising a family and creating a legacy. It was, James told his own grandchildren, the kind of love story that reminded everyone that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. That sometimes desperation leads to blessing. That sometimes what we need is not what we think we need, but something infinitely better. The Randall Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, always a reminder of the love that had built it. Samuel and Olivia's story became family legend, told and retold, a reminder of where they came from and what they were built on. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the Oklahoma prairie, their descendants remembered the cowboy who needed a housekeeper and the woman who needed a husband, and the love that had grown between them, transforming everything, creating a legacy that endured long after they were gone. Their story was simple but profound, a testament to the power of love, partnership, and commitment. They had taken their individual desperations and transformed them into something beautiful and lasting. They had built a life together that mattered, that rippled out through generations, that proved that love can flourish even in the hardest circumstances, if two people are willing to work for it, to cherish it, to honor it every day. In the end, that was what mattered. Not that they had started from necessity, but that they had built something real and lasting and beautiful. Not that she had needed a husband or that he had needed a housekeeper, but that they had found each other, had chosen each other, had loved each other with everything they had for as long as they lived. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.